Malo ćemo još pričekati par minuta da nam se ljudi priključe. Tako da evo imate još minutu da uzmete kavu ili obavite još zadnje mailove. Evo još nam se priključuju ljudi. I think we can start now in English because we have participants that are not from Croatia or Slovenia. Yes, I will wait another. Here we are. We have still some more participants joining. I will wait for another minute and then we can start. I'm hoping that's okay with you all. I think we can start. So we will have probably some more people joining in. But hello and welcome to the fourth transborder debate within the program Impact4Values. This program Impact4Values is within the framework of the EU program Citizens, Equality, Rights and Values, as we like to call it CERV. So if you hear another short for that, you will know that's the European funding. The topic today is human rights at the crossroads, protection of migrants, refugees, and asylum seekers. This transborder debate will be moderated by our colleague, Dr. Emina Bužinkić, and we have some great and esteemed debattees that will give us some insights into the topic that we are talking about. And Emina will later introduce in detail all of our debattees. Just a quick note to say that this project is Slovenian and Croatian, and it's within the consortium of the Center for Information, Cooperation and Development on Non-Governmental Organizations from Slovenia. And from Croatia, we have Foundation Slagalica and Foundation Solidarna. So I wish to all of us, I'm Slađana Novata. I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself. I'm the manager of the Civil Society Development Program within Solidarna. And I will give floor now to my dear colleague and moderator of today's debate, Dr. Emina Bužinkić. Emina. Maybe, excuse me, before you start, Emina, just to say quick few technical details. This debate is recorded and it will be available in English, translated to Slovenian and Croatian. And if you need translation, you have a little sign interpretation, and you can choose the channel in which you would like to listen to, either English, Croatian, or Slovenian. So feel free if you have any technical issues, please send directly to me the message, and we will see what we can do. So anyway, Emina, please take the floor and the mic.
Thanks, Lajana, so much for this kind intro and for the sharing of the technical details. I hope this is going to ease the conversation today. It is good to be here. I am really honored to be invited to facilitate this panel, especially knowing who is going to be speaking about the question or the subject of the matter today. And today we are talking about migrants' rights, newcomers' rights, and we are sort of angling it with human rights violations and deterioration of freedoms in Europe. We are going to be talking about the new Pact on Migration and Asylum, and we'll be talking about deterioration of rights and freedoms across the geographies in Europe, so not just European Union, but European peripheries as well. You know, when I was structuring this panel with the panelists, we were talking about the wide scope of things we are interested in today. So we are going to be talking about migration at large, but we are also going to be focusing on the aspects of integration, diaspora involvement, migrants, workers' position, and what solidary societies and states could be doing differently. On one hand, we are seeing the presentation of the new Pact on Migration and Asylum being sort of a solution for migrants' rights and for safety in Europe. However, we are very much aware that the new Pact enforces or reinforces militarization and criminalization of migrants and solidarity as such. And so in that sense, against this backdrop, our discussion is going to be centering on the intersections of justice, the questions of law and legal rights, and as well lived experiences. So we are going to be focusing on exploring the gaps and challenges, but also the opportunities and possibilities in the making that are coming from direct work with refugees and migrants, but also academic work and public debates as well. So we are joined by an incredible group of speakers whose work spans migrant integration, anti-racism, anti-coloniality or decoloniality when it comes to integration work. We are also having here people who are experienced in working in labor rights, human rights advocacy, and diaspora studies, and all of that is going to be interrelated in this conversation. Migrant integration, anti-racism, anti-coloniality. Okay, I think someone had their mic on, but we took care of that. And so I'm very thankful that each of them is going to bring unique perspectives. And it is not really our intention here to find spaces of full agreement or that we are trying to provoke disagreement and a sparky debate. We are trying to find solutions to the very grim realities we're living in. And it is very much welcoming to share different perspectives and insights we might have coming from all our distinguished experiences. So today I'm going to talk to Dženeta Karabegović from University of Salzburg in Austria. Then Lucia Mulalić from the Center for Peace Studies in Croatia. Yeah. We are going to be talking then with Alen Kovačević from Integration Center Prague in Czech Republic, and Goran Lukič from Delavska svetovalnica or Counselling Office for Workers in Slovenia. Slađana, thank you so much for putting the more comprehensive biographies of our speakers in the chat. Just to lay out how we are going to be talking today, we are going to have 2 rounds of questions for the speakers. We have agreed on those rounds in terms of starting with mapping out challenges and the grim realities that I was talking about earlier. And then the second round, we are going to be portraying some sort of possibilities that are coming from the places of our work and our research and further exploration, as well as interconnectedness. So we are going to start the first round with mapping out the context that comes from the new Pact on Migration and Asylum that claims to provide a comprehensive European approach, yet it deepens detention, racialized surveillance, and forced returns, while very much reinforcing the unequal treatment of migrants based on their race primarily, than their nationality and economic status. And the new pact very much expands border externalization, pushes people into pretty serious, precarious, and exploitative conditions, really cements a framework that treats migration as a security rather than a human right and freedom. And so here we're going to be examining the Pact's impact on migrants' rights, labor precarity, and the increasing securitization of migration governance. So our speakers will critically reflect on how these policies shape the lived realities of migrants, including migrant workers, asylum seekers, and the others. And then also what we are going to try to map out is the resistance emerging from these frameworks or in response to these frameworks. I believe that many of you who are present here have become aware of the critiques that have been articulated towards the new pact. And some of you also took part in elaborating those critiques. And the critiques are really here for the undermining of fundamental rights through expanded detention and racialized border controls and fast-track deportations. And even kids at 6 years old could be interrogated, detained, and deported, which is pretty scary reality. I bet you'd agree with me here. So let's start with talking about what are the most pressing gaps in Europe's migration and integration policies, especially under the new pact. And let's start with Dženeta here, Dženeta Karabegović from University of Salzburg. Dženeta, your scholarly work focuses on democratization and human rights. And I'm curious if you could talk a bit about what ways do you see this pact as a setback for human rights, and how does it intersect with broader patterns of democratic backsliding in Europe? And if you want to draw any parallels with the treatment of Yugoslav refugees and migrants from the 90s and any transitions we were going through ever since that time, please feel free to do so if you see you have enough time for that.
Yeah, if I have enough time is the sort of main challenge of this. I'll try to summarize as broadly as I can, sort of, and thank you for the opportunity to speak today and to sort of be in conversation with all of you. I'll try to contextualize, primarily focusing on my research. Now, this is often done through a migration and mobility lens. And I think it's safe to say that when we're speaking about Europe, also more broadly, frankly, beyond Europe, that we're currently in a period, and Emina has already mentioned this, of a securitization of migration that's only been increasing. And while on one hand, this is nothing new, right? Migration has always been securitized by a variety of actors. It's increasingly happening at this intersection of racism and anti-Islamic sentiment. And this has profound negative implications in terms of the quality of lived democracy, not just for migrants, but actually for the broader sort of populations. Now, on one side, the pact does represent a willingness, let's say, to at least jointly focus on finding migration policy solutions at the EU level. And I think the sort of ingoing sentiment, right, is a good one in terms of, trying to pursue a joint EU policy, which we know is difficult, right, at best. And this, I think, deserves to be praised, that there are individuals working on these kinds of EU-based solutions. However, on the other side, it's also very much a product of its environment, the environment that I just laid out. And this in many ways, reflects sort of these broader trends of democratic erosion in Europe. And I can sort of highlight here a few points that are interlinked. The increase of nationalist, populist influences, right, that continue to frame this migration through security rather than a humanitarian lens, or even frankly, an economic lens, right? Thinking of migration as sort of an economic benefit, at the very least, right? Really has led to an increase of fear and polarization on migration, rather than sort of seeing the perspective of migration as something that is ongoing, has been ongoing, will continue to be ongoing, right? And this has created a vicious cycle that only feeds on itself. And we've seen an increase of this over the last decade for sure, but especially in the last sort of few years. Secondly, if we sort of, zoom out, the Pact diminishes the EU's reputation as, this value-based actor with soft power potential, right? Which the EU likes to sell itself as, right? In terms of narrative, through the very sort of border externalization practices in collaboration, oftentimes with authoritarian-leaning states or full-on authoritarian states that, create a power imbalance between the EU and themselves, using this leverage to consolidate their own power further. And, we can name multiple examples here from Turkey to, multiple countries across Africa, and then, increasingly also in the Balkans. And then sort of the third point to make is that it sort of overlooks the need to consider migration through a long-term lens with sort of mutually beneficial policies that include circular migration, development, diaspora engagement, and mechanisms that really provide access to Europe, right, for individuals in search of a better life, that really disincentivize, this increase of human trafficking and smuggling that we're seeing. Now, note I mentioned circular migration here first, and I think it's an important thinking of migration in the long term, because it encourages, or it's sort of thinking through policies that encourage return, right? That are made, possible by fostering more human rights and democracy in the countries of origin, that ultimately reduce the very reasons that drive people to migrate in the first place. So in other ways, thinking of this, as fostering also a desire to return through circular migration, for example, rather than forcing return through, what we call voluntary return policies in the sort of migration management dialogues that we hear. Now, I'm running out of time. So in terms of transitional justice and migrant justice, there's multiple parallels to draw, but I think it's most important to sort of separate them when thinking about conflict-generated migration, right, and the importance of developing mechanisms that are victim-focused for that sort of post-conflict reconstruction and governance. And these are debates that are currently ongoing in terms of Syria especially, right? But also in terms of fostering the sort of political will to hold accountable actors responsible for severe violations of migrant rights within the EU today, right? And now we know that the burden of this has primarily been on NGOs and grassroots organizations and migrants in many ways, without little institutional support. And I think, lessons to be drawn from transitional justice is that this needs to be very much a comprehensive effort. And I think I'll stop there because I think it opens up lots of potential for discussion. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Dženeta. It's one of the aspects you were talking about is, what new Pact overlooks. And it is also what new policies and practices new Pact opens up when it overlooks the potential of circular migration or even the investment in post-conflict reconstruction. We are seeing on the other side that, for instance, a lot of Syrians as you mentioned, Syria as an example, we see that lots of Syrians are being pushed away from Europe, and they're being offered really poor financial incentives to go back to Syria, where they actually can't meet much or can't find their homes. They can't find their homes being solid anymore, let alone anything else as in terms of economic opportunities, and it's really hard to even talk about bare survival. But the new pact has enabled states to push refugees back into their countries once they are out of the war, even though the situation is pretty devastating on social, political, and economic levels. That also talks a little bit or a lot about how the integration practices in Europe have been looking like, and how much of a desire is there to keep the refugees that are non-white, non-European, non-Christian, and if we could go even more at the European soil. So I will ask Lucia actually to get into the discussion here, because Lucia is dealing with anti-racist and decolonial critiques of integration policies. I am wondering if you could expand on Dženeta's analysis and talk more specifically about the ways European states continue to reproduce racialized hierarchies through their migration frameworks, especially the ones when it comes to the ones in the realm of integration. Lucia.
And thank you for this invitation and the possibility to speak. Are you hearing me? Yes.
It's cutting in and out, but we are hearing you now.
Yeah. I just had a little info that my internet connection is unstable. I hope it will not continue to be so. I hope now it's, yeah? Okay, good. Okay, I will start, and if you will all give me some grace, maybe in this first part I will be a bit longer, and then in the second round of questions I might be a bit shorter, so it will balance itself out. Just a note that I'm not, as Emina said, I'm more of a practitioner and less of a theorist, so have that in mind. And another note is that what I will speak now is something that ever since I started working in this field, volunteering, being active, I always had an unease with the way we were describing things, such as concepts of integration and so on. And then this framework of decoloniality kind of made this unease more clear, in the sense of, this is what is bringing me problems, and this is what is, in my opinion, offering some potential solutions on which we will, I guess, come in the second round. But now to answer your question, I think we hear oftentimes that Europe is a fortress in a way, and this kind of reflects in the policies that we have been talking about, especially in the new Migration Pact. And I think that this is true and untrue in a sense. Of course, it has Europe has perfected this kind of unjust policies that securitize and criminalize migration, and we see it in the new, reflected in the new pact very well. But on the other hand, I would throw, and it does it for a purpose, as it's an aging continent. We hear this, of course, a lot, and there is a need for labor, right? So in this sense, I would say that the asylum system is a bit porous, not completely, of course, and it allows people to migrate. If people die on the way, it doesn't really matter, as there will always be new bodies to replace those that have perished. And then these bodies that do arrive here will be used to fill the needed workplaces of doctors, nurses, construction workers, cleaners, and so on. All those that create, that with their labor create capital and do services that make our states function. And most of these people live in states of liminality, precarity, not knowing the full scope of rights. Another level is a whole population of people who have been irregularly working in tomato system that abuses them, deports them, and so on. I think we noted already that the Pact is a great example of further racializations and hierarchizations of migration, limiting access to asylum, eroding the principle of non-refoulement, disencouraging of the safe third country concept, as we were noting before, this outsourcing of border management, externalization, and so on. That is also linked to very neo-colonial practices, forcing countries to receive people in return for development aid, or however we want to call it. Of course, very linked, the policies of migration are policies of integration. For all those who are lucky enough to enter and not die on our borders, but then they get, I would argue, subjected to another level of the humanization, securitization, in another way, perhaps in a more cultural sense. Of course, integration policies in Europe are not harmonized on a supranational level, so they are left in the mandate of nation states mostly. And even though we are supposed to think that there are different approaches to integration, and of course, different countries in Europe have different names of this concept, I would argue that all target newly migrating populations, or even those who have been here for a while but are still labeled second generation, third generation, so on, they are basically assimilationist in their core. And this is the level of
Okay, I think maybe this is a good time to ask Lucia to try to find another source of connection. Hey, Lucia. I don't know if you can hear me, but you are seriously cutting in and out, and we barely can grasp what you're saying. Do you mind trying to find another source of connection, and then we'll come back to you? Okay.
Maybe if I can recommend by turning the camera off, maybe the internet connection will be better.
Sure, I'm gonna text her that. Thanks so much for that.
I'm back and I heard it. Yeah, I'm turning off my camera now.
Perfect. Okay, let's try that.
Let's try.
It sounds better.
Okay. Hopefully it stays like this.
It's better.
Okay,
please go on.
Yeah? Okay. Well, I hope some of the things at least you heard. If not, maybe we can talk about a bit more in the discussion. Okay, a few points left is that if we talk of integration, of course, we talk of societies, and we talk of one part of the society that does not appear on this integration monitor, that social sciences have, policies of states have. And this omission does the work of separating those who are considered to already make up the society and those who are not part of the society, and then that have to integrate, right? And now I quote, "The notion of integration, along with the strategies and policies governing it, it's deeply entangled with power dynamics, often perpetuated by the lingering legacy of colonialism." I hope you are hearing me now and it's not cutting. Yeah? Okay. This legacy is not merely historical, but actively shapes contemporary practices, framing integration as a process through which displaced populations are managed, categorized, and controlled. My friend recently said, "Integration is a never-ending process, as due to your race, culture, and so on, you will never just be just quite like us." And for a while, we can see that migrations who have populated have been doing this assimilation by themselves, trying to somehow this will help get them accepted. But I think today's society has shown very clearly that this does not work, as people cannot hide their heritage, race, even their names, as it comes out sooner or later, and then they are back to being othered in a way. And this has concrete effects in practice. Policies that they are targets of, city urbanization policies, social security policies, impoverish populations, put them on the outskirts of the cities, prevent them from accessing quality infrastructure. They, due to racism, cannot get jobs and so on, so they're left somehow to fend for themselves. I think I will end it here. I still have some few more points, but I think we can go into the discussion part later. Thank you, and apologies for my bad internet.
Thanks so much, Lucia. I feel so sad that we haven't heard every single bit of your poignant analysis that speaks so clearly about how integration policies have been envisioned as an extended arm of state control and surveillance and racialization practices that are very inherent to migration politics across Europe and arguably globally present as well. The aspect you were talking about is the aspect of assimilation that you were talking about is something that is going to be leading our discussion from now on too. And I want to ask Alen if you could join now and talk a bit about how integration policies, or how do you perceive integration policies often focusing on assimilation of migrants and refugees rather than rights or access-based approaches. And from your experience, what are those most critical policy gaps diverging from more justice as a part of integration policies? And feel free to talk about your personal experience too, because I know that's been driving your work now as a director of the Integration Center in Prague.
First of all, hello everyone, and I want to start with thanking for invitation to join this debate. It's really a privilege to be here and discuss with you such an important issue such as integration and migration. I truly appreciate this opportunity to share my thoughts. So yeah, when you talk about integration in Czech Republic, we should start, let's say, from the beginning, or from the let's say from above. And the key aspect of integration here is strong connection, I would say, to security. So there's really hard push from the late 90s to early 2000 to let's say Ministry of Interior, and especially Department for Asylum and Migration Policy overseas, took this agenda, integration agenda, and they reshape, I would say, legislation, regulation. And when it's strong connection to security concerns, it's often prioritize risk and restriction over inclusion and equal opportunities. On the other hand, fortunately, this also comes with clear goals and priorities that define how integration should take place in Czech Republic, what role state has to have, non-profit organization like integration centers like ours, and other NGO, what should they play in the process. So why is this important? I would say because when migration is seen primarily as a security issue, integration policies could become stricter, and it's experience here in Czech Republic. It could make it harder for migrants to fully participate in society. But as I mentioned, at the other hand, we have many instruments and possibilities to help migrants. So and the funding, I would say, it's at the top level. As you mentioned, from my personal experience, if I can compare the happenings, what happened 30 something years ago here, yeah, I would say former refugees, if I can say it like that. Me and my family arrived in Czech Republic during the Bosnian Civil War in 1993, and back then migration policy were much open. There was no visas, like I would say free visa regime, so we can came to Czech Republic. My parents managed to navigate, let's say, the system without any support, NGO support, or there was not such a bureaucratic, so let's say, issues back then. Simply, there were few barriers than now. Today's situation is very different. I would say the Czech Republic now has some of the strictest residency permit requirements in the EU. I don't want to say it's top 3, 5, but I would say it's one of the strictest. So it's not really easy to get a permit or visa or to get a job here in Czech Republic and then get some kind of permanent residency and so on. So, and when you, let's say, put this to another issue, a lack of clear information and bureaucracy complexity here, it makes it nearly impossible for migrants to handle the process alone. So, and that's it's where our center plays a crucial role, or similar NGOs here. We can helping people to integrate faster and more effectively, really with provide some basic information, some true informations, like, and we advise them like how to, let's say, faster adapt and integrate in Prague society. Yeah, I would talk a bit more as well about that key challenges here for migrants. As I mentioned, lack of information and language barriers. It's one of the, I would say, more crucial things here. Many migrants arrive without any knowledge of Czech language, because Czech language, as you know, is really hard, one of the hardest, I would say. And then you have also bureaucratic system, and really it's not easy to understand what we really want from them, from migrants. So public institutions are often not fully prepared and, let's say, open to engage with migrants in an inclusive way. For example, in healthcare, they are really struggling there because there are language barriers, sometimes leads to discrimination, or even they refuse to provide service because they don't want to talk to migrants who don't understand any Czech. So yeah, there's the issues we deal in here with. Then I would say the other challenge here is I would say like land and complex residency and work permit process. It's really sometimes took really long period for migrants to let's say get in to the procedure for obtaining extending change permits are slow, say complicated somehow, and also unclear. On the other hand, that's why we exist as Integration Center of Prague and other NGO. We are, and that cases we are helping the migrants and provide some service to them to understand better and make this process maybe even easier. Many migrants who came to Czech Republic struggling with the rules, leading to delays and uncertainty. So as well, that's why we're helping them. Also, I would want to mention in Czech Republic, I guess it's the same in other European cities or countries. There are still persist stereotypes and public perception that migrants steal the jobs from locals, increase some crime rates, threaten Czech culture, and so on. So we're really also trying to fight against that. In reality, we talk about that migrants really contribute significantly to economic growth here in Czech Republic, especially last 2.5 years since Ukrainian refugees came to Czech Republic. It's a few months ago we had a statistic that Czech state gave to help migrants, to help refugees, about like 1.5 million of Czech crowns, but in 2 years they take back to 2.5 more times. So it's like about 2.5 millions. Like they get back to economic. So it's really plus number, you know. Also we are addressing that labor shortages, and also that enriching local culture diversity could help it, because I'm so pro to open society and open dialogues, and I think Czech culture sometimes is really closed and not so easygoing with the others. So key part of our work is raising awareness and changing this perception. Key areas for improvement is another part I want to talk. I think education and recognition of collocation.
Alan, can I please ask you to leave the improvements for the next round?
Okay,
And so
I'm already okay.
This is good, and we are coming to that.
Okay. May I just conclude what needs to change, or it's also for another?
Yeah, if you need another minute to conclude, no.
Okay, sorry. Thank you. So just to conclude, like what needs to change here, in my opinion, we need to both top-down and bottom-up approach to integration in systematic and holistic way. Migration, it's not temporary. A number of migrants Czech Republic will continue to grow. Long-term planning is essential to ensure education, let's say healthcare, social service, and employment support are ready. So migrants must be included, not just as workers, but as fully members of society. That's my opinion, and I and my organization want to fight for it. We all have a role in shaping an inclusive and welcoming environment. So government, institution, and society alike. So let's say together we can build a community that thrives our diversity and mutual support. That's our like statement, and thank you. I hope I didn't prolong my speech more.
Thanks so much, especially for concluding this with how it's important to build more welcoming society. On the other hand, we are seeing that the societies or, state-led politics and even, social interaction are leading to a lot of hostilities. And Goran, I want to ask you more specifically about the hostilities and precarity that migrant workers are kind of caught in. It is definitely sure that the backdrop of securitization hits hard the position of migrant workers. And it's not just securitization. Securitization is coupled with the neoliberal economic policies that are, as Lucia said, really much based on exploitation, expendability of migrant labor and migrant bodies. And so in that sense, could you talk a bit about the intersections of migration, labor exploitations, and restrictive legal frameworks when it comes to labor migrants?
Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me. Well, this is quite a complex question, yes. So I will try to explain in a couple of minutes. So regarding the hostility, I would say that there is quite lots of amount of institutional hostility towards migrants. Of course, they will not say that out loud, nobody at these institutions. But the thing that I'm saying is also the thing that Alen was saying regarding the process of getting the documentation. So it takes, for example, in Slovenia, several months, so 6 to 8 months to get proper permits just to work. So this is one way of institutional hostility, because in the meantime, not only the worker, but also the family members of this worker, it could happen that they are without social insurance. So it could happen that, for example, in some cases, we also had these cases at our counseling office for workers, that for example, the babies were left out of the system because the processes at the administrative unit were taking so long that there were no proof anymore to be in the system. So this is basically the hostility that I'm talking about. So the thing is that the migrants and their families, they are put into this treadmill of getting the papers, but not only once. So this treadmill of getting the papers is perpetual. So it's something that, unfortunately, migrants and their families are integrated into the administrative hellhole, to say so, because they all the time, they have to collect the papers to be legit. So what does it mean in concrete case? It means that first you have temporary visa. You have to collect, for example, the payslips. You have to collect the proper sufficient means, proof of this sufficient means. You have to collect that from the bank. So the person, which is your counselor at the administrative unit, sees every penny that you spend, sees every penny that your wife, everybody spends. So he has total control of your basic, let's say, spending on everyday means. So after that, When you want to prolong this working permit and, of course, working and living permit, this thing happen again. You have to basically get then 6 months pay slips, again, 6 months proof from the bank, and then you have to basically prove that you have sufficient means. What does it mean, sufficient means? It means, for example, that if you want to have permanent residence in Slovenia, if you are a family of 4, you have to provide to the administrative unit that you have 2,000 euros net. Without, it is net money, which is on the account. So, for example, the minimum wage, net minimum wage in Slovenia is about a little bit less than 1,000 euro. So that means that both father and mother, they have to work at least on minimum wage. Well, this is the case which is happening all the time. They are working all the time on minimum wage. And this is really a sad, let's say, description of the situation. But unfortunately, on the one hand side, you have the institutional pressure through the administrative procedures on the migrants and their families. The consequence of that is that you're turning the families into the economic units. They are all the time chasing the money. They're all the time chasing the money just to prove that they are sufficient enough and legal enough to be in Slovenia. What does it mean? It means that they are working all the time. They are chasing these working hours all the time just to collect these pay slips to say, I have enough money to be exploited in Slovenia. So this is like, it's not like me being cynical, but we are getting to this second part of the story. If you are in the situation as a migrant worker, then you are being really put into this administrative procedure and the pressure on the daily basis, to say so. But if you are on the other side as an employer, this is another story. Unfortunately, there is not so much administrative procedures on the employers per se. So, for example, there is not so much papers to be proven from the employers. So on the one hand side, you have administrative pressure on the migrant workers. On the other hand side, you have deregulation pressure from the employers to the state. We need less papers, we need less procedures, we need more workers, we need more cheap labor. So can you see this schizophrenic situation, for example, that it's taking part in the reality? Because you have the families of migrant workers which are struggling daily to collect enough money to be here. On the other hand, you have lots of employers which are saying, oh, we don't want to employ you because there is too much administrative procedure, but you can work without papers. You can work here without papers. Well, if anything happens, it's your fault, then I can live by, because the employer can then establish a company in days, to say so. But if the migrant worker is get caught by the, for example, labor inspector or the tax office, then he's put into the system. And if the administrative unit sees that in the system, he cannot get working visa anymore. So this is, the power play which are seeing. So to say, at least, the procedures are basic part of this institutional hostility which is going on. And unfortunately, as we can see, it's also getting fast forwarded, because on the one hand side, we have the migration procedures or migration flows, to say so, like in traditional ways, which are coming from the ex-Yugoslavia as economists say, working pool. And lots of employers are also saying that the ex-Yugoslavia pool is getting smaller and smaller, but it's getting smaller because lots of workers which are coming from Bosnia and Serbia are now going through Slovenia because they don't want to mess anymore with these administrative procedures, and they are going to Austria, they're going to Germany. And this pool of lack of workers is now being, let's say, filled with the workers from India, Pakistan, Nepal, Bangladesh, Philippines, and that's where the second part of the story kicks in. These workers, which are coming from Nepal, Bangladesh, and other countries, the language barrier is even higher, and we have to take into account that these workers are paying, I think, from 3,000 euros plus to 10,000 euros just to get to Slovenia. They're paying this amount of money to these so-called agencies in the country of origins. So now we can imagine if a worker comes from, say, India, pays 10,000 euros. That means that he goes to the local so-called bank, in reality it's local shark, with interest rates of 20%, and the family is also putting this money into this person as a family investment. This person goes to Slovenia through Croatia, then he has to pay another sum of money to Croatian intermediate, then he comes to Slovenia just to be exploited because he has to earn the money. And this worker, when he comes to us, when he says, I'm being exploited, then when we try to explain to him legal procedures, this worker is saying, I don't have time for that. I have to earn the money, to collect the money, to send this money to country of origin, to my family, because then the loan shark will come. I don't know what will happen. So this, let's say, generation of migrants, which are coming now, we have a big problem because labor law is something which is an obstacle for them. It's something which they don't have time to deal with because they have to earn the money. Not only the money to provide the sufficient means to be in Slovenia to renew the working permits, but also the money to collect the debt which was in country of origin. So this is, now the second stage of this, let's say, not only hostility, but the economization of migration, because there are lots of these agencies in India, Nepal, Pakistan, which are heavily connected, and they are, I would say quite bluntly, they are like criminal organizations. If you don't pay us, then don't bother not only coming to us, but we will do something to you. So this is something which has to be taken care of international level. This is something which has to be taken care of, for example, to the diplomatic levels from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Slovenia to India. And this is something which we have a big problem right now because there are more and more workers coming from this part of the world which are heavily indebted. And they're not the persons which don't understand that their labor rights are being heavily damaged. They know that, but they simply are trapped in a situation in which on one hand side, they have the families, on the second, they have to earn the money. So I think that the flow of migration is getting faster and faster. It's not only about being informed, it's about being pressured into this situation, because I'm sure that lots of these workers, they know their basic rights. So I think that it's up to us, not only NGOs, of course, to take this responsibility to inform them and to pressure the institutions, but it's up to the institutions to pressure the employers and to pressure the institutions which are in the connection with the countries of origin to cut this pressure from the country of origin. So that's the situation right now we have in Slovenia. And one other thing is coming back to this migration pool from ex-Yugoslavia, more and more workers and their families are basically going back to Bosnia and Serbia because when they calculate the cost of living in Slovenia, when they calculate the wage on one hand side and the cost of living, for example, the rents in which we have quite expensive in Slovenia, there is simply minus on their bank account. They cannot basically live with that, and they say, I have a house in Bosnia, I don't have a rent there, so basically I'm going back to Bosnia, I'm going back to Serbia. And this is now what is going on. So as you can see, as the pool of migrant flow from ex-Yugoslavia is shrinking, then more and more workers are coming from these countries, more and more indebted workers, migration flow is faster, exploitation is faster. And just to clarify the final, let's say, execution of the exploitation, these very same employers are saying to these workers from these countries, India, Nepal, if you leave me, if you're going to leave me, for example, in 1 year or in 2 years, then I'll make sure that you will be expelled from Slovenia. And they do that. They do that by basically, when these workers come to Slovenia, they just push the papers to sign, and in these papers, it's not only labor contract, it's also some sort of documentation which they sign, these workers, in which they in advance are writing that they are basically saying that they don't need anymore the working permit. And with that signature, the employer, in the case if the worker is just trying to escape this employer is with the signature of the worker who is resigning his working and living permit without knowing, goes to the administrative unit, and administrative unit then basically cuts off his living and working permit without the worker knowing. So they are basically abusing the institutional system, the very same employers, just to send a signal to these workers, these heavily indebted workers, if you mess with me, you are invisible. And there are cases in Slovenia which unfortunately are going in that direction. So I would say this is not quite an optimistic picture that I'm writing or that I'm saying to you, but I'm basically saying that this is the part of the picture which, if we don't do something and if the institutions don't do something, I think it will be even worse. So maybe a pessimistic end, but it is what it is.
Thanks very much, Goran, for this very detailed outlining of the positionality of migrant workers. Specifically, we could talk about migrant workers from ex-Yugoslavia over the past 30 years and even earlier, the treatment of gastarbeiters in the Western countries. But then the new precarity really comes with people coming from far east or far south. And the treatment of global south populations is becoming increasingly worrying. And, you know, as you walk some of the cities, for instance, Zagreb, oftentimes in parks, you can find people sleeping many nights in a row in those parks because they don't have anywhere to be because their residence permits are over and no one is going to extend them because they don't want to bear the cost and they don't want to do the procedure. And as Lucia said, you know, migrant bodies are expendable and replaceable. And in that sense, it's sometimes cheaper to bring a new body for the labor rather than to extend the permit for someone who's already here. It's pretty worrisome how the migration and capitalist logics are working together. In a sense, you were talking about the impossibility of integration, Goran. It is very much impossible to have a quality of life that enables you to have a decent housing, that to have to enjoy social rights, to enjoy health insurance, and many other aspects. And I actually want to ask Lucia if she could talk about that impossibility of integration, or how the EU integration policies are being exclusionary, but also if we could move forward to possibility thinking, envisioning and imagining what can we think of beyond these European current securitization painted models of integration, and what migrant-led and anti-racist movements are teaching us here. With this, I'm actually starting the second round of questions to our guest speakers, and then we're going to be opening the floor. And feel free as they speak to put your questions in the chat box, or wait for us to finish this round in about 20 minutes, and then we're going to open the floor for a larger conversation. So Lucia, please go ahead if you're here. Okay.
I'm here. I will turn off the camera again.
Yes.
So to try to prevent, and please, yes, if I start cutting off again, just signal me, please. Thank you. Okay, for me, it's quite difficult to say what could be some possible alternatives or what lies beyond what we have now. For these problems that Goran was explaining, are you hearing me? Yes, okay. Because it says, again, my internet is unstable. I don't know what is going on. Okay. All these things that Goran was describing is something that we deal with on a daily basis as working in the civil sector. And we are also oftentimes as well in a precarious and uncertain situation ourselves. And it's a space that doesn't give us a lot of potential for thinking of what could be the alternatives. But in my opinion, the first step is to leave behind the concept of integration and advocacy for better integration models and policies, and to focus on, I would say, the root issues that we have kind of thematized today, the existing racial hierarchical societies that we see that demonize and scapegoat certain populations, which is of course connected. And that I think we should add, that doesn't mean we should abolish advocating for just policies, but just the framework of how we understand them should change and shift. And I think we should start advocating for justice and dignity, which has to be reflected in policy, in state structures or other structures in all levels. And I think this also goes to moving from our understandings of nation states and societies and cultures that are prevalent today, and exacerbated, I would say, the way we understand nations and societies and cultures. This understanding has to really radically shift, favoring an approach that understands today's societies as diverse, evolving, mutually adaptive, more and more transnational. I will quote some authors now because they say it much more nicely than me. And this is where I see this decolonizing integration moment that comes into play, which would mean not only critiquing or dismantling how we see them in a way that honors the autonomy, agency, and cultural sovereignty of displaced communities that we are talking about. And this requires not only policy reform, but a radical co-creation that recognizes displaced persons as partners and not subjects. And this also demands integration and of this concept of integration. This also means a vision of integration as a space for mutual exchange, respect, justice, policy reforms that address these historical but contemporary injustices of today. It also means moving from this approach of top-down process of seeing integration, rethinking it as a set of practices grounded in reciprocity, relationality. It's also prioritizing the agency, cultural knowledge, and lived experiences of communities we talk about, and seeing people not as burdens, but as critical participants in the social fabric. This is all not my thoughts, but an article I reflect, and now I can send it in the link here in the chat. This also ultimately means material, concrete refigurations of the structures. So dismantling colonial infrastructures, ideologies that sustain this inequality. All this that we were talking about in practice, what it means, administrative violence, and so on. This is a reflection of that. And now briefly how migrant movements, migrant-led movements can help us get to that point. Just before I mention a few sentences on this, do you still hear me? Yes, okay, good. I mentioned in the beginning that how irregularized populations are, overworked, policed, discriminated against, refused access to basic services. But from those populations, we also see most political resistance, actually, that kind of ruptures this unjust system. So what these movements can do, and they are already doing, is showing us the way and showing us where these junctures around which we can join and should join forces are. The most simple example for me is this just general refusal of the border itself by crossing it, right, without necessary papers, kind of rejecting this racialized border hierarchy as it is by movements of people, all over the world, in Latin America, in Bosnia, in Morocco, entering, so all over the globe. But of course, there are other examples. I would say, for example, occupation of churches by the sans-papiers movement that refused this label of being illegal and that demand dignified life, right? Or movements of gilets noirs, like the advocacy for rights of undocumented workers in France, parallelly very similar movements in Italy, strikes and protests of undocumented workers in Italian fields that demand amnesty, regularization, combating basically slave-like conditions. deaths in fields. So all this thinking that has to happen, and mobilize broad sectors of society, unions, NGOs, churches, religious communities, educational communities, so that join in advocacy not for integration policies as we envision them, but for human dignity, dignified life, and an end for this racialized violent systems that are kind of reflected in one, state structures of our states, capitalist modes of extracting labor and resources, and that are also present in opinions and attitudes of, let's be honest, a large number of Europeans. So we also have to be honest and self-reflect and begin this process of unlearning of all these kind of deeply rooted, and that we see more and more today. I end with
Thanks, Lucia. I hope I didn't interrupt you. You're done, right? Okay.
I am done. I hope you heard me.
You were cutting in and out a bit, but I think we got the gist. Thanks for sharing it, and please feel free to put in a chat box your the article you were referencing. There are really very important aspects of what you were talking about here when it comes to justice in integration, or new versions, new ways, new paradigms of what we could call integration, which do start with dismantling racial hierarchies, and do move towards fully understanding autonomy, agency, cultural sovereignty, reciprocity, and relationality, and interdependence as well. And along that line, or the line that actually sort of emphasizes taking into consideration all these aspects, but also reconfiguring our societies materially, and then also paying attention to what we are learning from migrant-led movements, I would like to turn to Goran, actually, and ask you if you could reflect to those two lines. I am curious if you could tell us a bit about what happens with migrant workers in Slovenia right now in terms of their organizing, their resistance to this capitalist extractive way of doing. How do you also envision that the organizations like yours, and in collaboration with trade unions, are shifting these practices, and how are you supporting migrant workers, or how are migrant workers and your organization sort of collaborating in order to show this more of a community approach, rather than, we are part of Slovenia and you are the strangers here?
Well, thank you for this question. I'm a bit afraid of this question because, again, I don't know if I have the let's say the positive outcome and output on that question, but nevertheless, we are a small NGO, so we are not a big NGO. There are 4 of us which are dealing with all this, not only migrant workers but workers as such. But the thing is, and I'll be here quite sincere, trade unions as let's say as a system, as a movement, my experience is they are basically putting themselves into the quite pragmatic trap that dealing with migrant workers is too complex. Because when you have a migrant worker, you don't have only one problem, you have 4 or 5 problems, but only one membership fee. So that means that it's not cost effective to have a migrant worker, because in the end, the migrant worker is a migrant worker. He is today here, tomorrow he's not here anymore. So quite pragmatically saying, there is a problem also from the trade union perspective of seeing migrant workers, from that perspective, which I'm saying right now, from the perspective of is worthy enough to deal with so much problems? Is it time-consuming enough to deal with so much problems regarding migrant workers? Because in a sense, the trade union movement is, and I'm going to be quite provocative here, quite nationalistic movement. because in lots of membership is traditionally Slovenian membership, and this Slovenian membership grew their basically their working time, their working years in one premise, at one place. So basically, at that place, they have collective agreement, they have trade union, they have their network. So that when a worker, which is traditionally part of the trade union movement, calls the trade union representative, it's about basically a question which is part of organized answer through collective agreements, through laws. So the answer is quite easy, and the pressure is quite easy. The pressure is basically institutionalized through the trade unions. But when you have a migrant worker, there is no collective agreement in lots of cases. There is law, but there is nobody to put the pressure on the lawmaker. There is nobody to put the pressure on the labor inspector. Because, when a migrant worker comes, as I was saying, to us, basically this is the first stepping stone of getting the rights back. You have to go to labor inspector, you have to go to the court. You have to pay some fee at the court. So I would say that collaboration with the trade unions is sometimes quite hard, because in some cases, trade unions see, as I was saying, migrant workers as something which is too much of a problem for them, because this is not the way that they are dealing things with an organized collective agreement way. Because, when you have a migrant worker, there is working visas, there is working permits, there is living permits, there are things around the social insurance, health insurance, not only labor law. And when you put all these problems from one person to the trade union, they tend to basically say, oh, now we have a problem. So I would say, pragmatically put, that they have a long way to put themselves into the positions of opening to the migrant workers and their needs. But on the other side, migrant workers, they have their own social networks, which is quite fast. This social network is social media. It's Viber, it's WhatsApp. So the informations that they get, unfortunately, are through social media. The employers that they get, unfortunately, are through social media. So they get the employers which are saying to them, come to Slovenia, you will get €9. They come to Slovenia, they get nothing. So the network which they have, the migrant workers, is basically the consequence of the other network, which is not basically effective enough to provide them the proper information. And to say at least, for example, our work is basically also a consequence of that, because lots of institutions, Health Institute, Center for Social Work, also, other institutions, also the police, are basically informing the migrant workers that they should come to us. So basically, they are turning the migrant workers to us, the four of us. So then lots of migrant workers are saying, oh, we were at the employment service, for example, which we are collaborating quite well, for example, oh, they said, you come to us. So basically, the institutions are putting, let's say, the burden of informing and also dealing with that complex issues also on the NGOs. But we are not the saviors. We don't want to be the saviors. So we have also, limited means, as Lucia was saying. So we are not, the ones who are going to say, we're going to save all the migrants. I don't want to do that. So basically, it's also about our efficiency of surviving, basically, as an organization. We are, for example, our organization is a membership fee organization. We as an NGO are an exception, for example, on the average NGO in Slovenia. Average NGO in Slovenia gets the money from the projects. We don't get the money from the projects. We get the money from the membership fee, from the workers directly. So now we have one project which we are starting to deal with, a fight against human trafficking. But this is the first big project that we have after 9 years. So it's a question about how to organize them ourselves most effectively to provide sufficient information to the migrant workers. And to say at least at the end, we have to break this circle of disinformation within the social networks of migrant workers. So basically that means that we have to go to the places where migrant workers get the information. We have to go to the Facebook. We have to connect with Viber. So we have to, implant proper information there, not just to wait that the migrant workers come through the institutions to us, and then it's too late, basically, sometimes. So I don't know if I answered the question, but, there are lots of questions here to be answered.
You are so right. There are more questions than the time we could properly answer them. I was curious about migrant workers organizing too. I am currently mapping out some of the migrants organizing in the region, and I came across and have been reading a lot about the migrants organizing in Zagreb in 2020, for instance. The migrants that worked for Volt organized a protest, Revolt, and ask for better labor conditions, especially, during the pandemic when not only the labor was precarious, but health protection was very precarious. And so they were able to, because of their collective action and the protest, they were able to get better labor conditions from their employers, and they have remained these conditions all throughout ever since today. So I am also trying to say here that some of the ideas when it comes not only to knowledge production, but when it comes to the practice that employers are sort of changing readily or not, do come from migrant workers when they organize and collaborate. But another thing that we were talking about here, and Goran, I could ask you more, but we'll move on so we can give our audience also opportunity to talk. I'm going to turn to Alen and Dženeta. And Alen, I do remember your previous answer when you were talking about the importance of open dialogue. And you were talking about believing in open society. And so if you could kind of expand a little bit on that, what are these forms of bottom-up solidarity and either migrant self-organizing or collaboration between migrants and the organizations such as yours? How do you reinforce or push for that open dialogue and society, while also bearing in mind that it can't be just the folklore? It has to be some sort of challenging of the racialization of the poor working and living conditions for migrants and refugees. So not just pure kindness, right? And support in humanitarian sense, but what is politically changing in terms of their positionality too through this work?
Just let me say one thing before I answer your question. I want to build on our meaningful discussion here, what Goran and Lucia say to, let's say, my vision in the discussion. One of the fundamental obstacles here to successful integration in Czech Republic, I recognize, as speakers previously say, is lack of, for me, a lack of long-term systematic approach. Many city representative, government representative tend to believe that migrants or refugees are only here temporarily or will eventually return home or relocate somewhere else. And that's really always hard to explain that most people are always stay when they work, as Goran said, when they have work, when they kids go to schools, like they won't go back after a few years if they have economic reason to stay in the country. At the same time, some of migrants, I would say, at the same time, on the other hand, some of migrants feel comfortable to function solely with their own communities and may not, let's say, concentrate effort to fully integrate into society. So when you put these things together, like two perspectives, considering together, it becomes clear that integration, it's not easy. And let's say our center has considerable work to do, because both in engaging with city leadership and stakeholders, and also supporting our clients, migrants, to be more open, as you now ask, and let's say coming out from comfort zone and try to learn the language, try to do something from their own, not within community or some people who they pay to give them the documents, so on. So yeah, in our, let's say, goals about helping more, or helping to have discussion about open communities, open society, we really supporting civic migrants organization. we are organizing or preparing some kind of also regional platforms where we have some expert people from City of Prague, from Ministry of Interior, from other NGOs. We discuss and to make the biggest priorities and the biggest issue in Prague, such as always like free service for migrants, for refugees, let's say health insurance, schools, and so on and so on. In Czech Republic, migrant communities have formed active organizations that support one another and work toward common goals. So they organize, and not just as we, as integration center, but they organize leisure activities, cultural events. They providing support for children and mothers, for example. They offering also Czech language courses and psychological assistance, especially nowadays. It's really crucial for Ukrainian refugees, what they are going through, beyond that, like providing a social service, these initiatives foster connections and let's say strengthen intercultural awareness, so which enriching both migrants communities and Czech society as a whole. So I have one, let's say, I'm proud. We have really one great organization here in Czech Republic, in Prague. It's called Lastavica. I think it's swollen in English, if I'm not mistaken. And this, like, the organization really demonstrate the power of solidarity here, because it's a civic organization bringing together people from former Yugoslavia, came here in 90s. So they organize cultural events, they social gatherings, support networkings. Really, when we have floods in Bosnia and in all over the country, so they help strengthen the ties between communities and create sense of belonging. So I'm really proud that one of the, I would say, shining organization, migrant organization here is actually from Bosnia, from Yugoslavia. When it comes to human rights advocacy, let's say, here are based like consortium from non-governmental organization, and that organization plays a key role. They defend the rights of foreigners or refugees, and they're working on legislative changes to improve integration policies. They, let's say, combating with Ministry of Interior or with the government representatives about many issues, discrimination, xenophobia, exploitation, and so on. And also their field of work, it's ensuring fair access to legal and social services for vulnerable groups, as we also doing in integration centers. So yeah, that's the, I would say, one part of work, how we can more discuss about integration, how we can open society, and the other hand, I feel that really, like, national governments often focus or not focusing to be open. So I would paraphrase one quote. I was a few months ago at one conference, and they say, "City have no borders." But yeah, state has it. So it's really on us who can have a discussion, who can work with city representatives to be more open, to try to change the policies, because in the city we have no borders. So we are open. Let's be honest, we are open to everyone, because yeah. This perspective highlights how cities can create opportunities for integration, because in Prague, it's nearly about 30% of population consists of migrants. And I think this is really a huge number, and it should be a top priority for the city leadership. And I feel it's not still. And in a couple of years, it could be even more. So because Prague is attractive, let's say, people's coming all over the world, not only such refugees, but as Goran mentioned, in Slovenia, we also have many people from India, Bangladesh, and so on, Turkey, and so on. So yeah, we need stronger leadership from city representatives to, let's say, drive inclusion efforts. We also need to closer cooperate with institutions and stakeholders to develop let's say, long-term strategies. And also, I would say a shift in perspective. Integration is not just administrative task. It's about shaping the future, let's say, in our city or where we are belong. So to me, like my goal, or let's say goal of Integration Center, is really building an inclusive Prague. Requires like commitment, collaboration, with shared vision, with the representatives. We have to or must continue building bridges, and embracing idea of city without borders. I really like that quote. So yeah, we want to make Prague a leading example of inclusive urban development city. So yeah, the diversity is not a challenge, but it should be an opportunity for us, as I see it.
Thank you, Alen. What I noticed when you were talking about the open society and a dialogue was the way you were elaborating the labor of the Sparrow or Lastavica organization. And you were talking about how they organize cultural events, sports, childcare support, psychological support and whatnot. And, you know, I was thinking, you know, people make their ways. That's what people do. And, you know, people do oftentimes get out of discomfort to bring back life to some sort of normalcy, to some sort of familiarity. And migrant communities are really well doing that. These are actually diasporic communities too, which kind of opened the floor to Dženeta and, you know, the last conversation we're going to have here, or part of the conversation, because Dženeta is actually researching and working with transnationalism and diaspora mobilization. And I'm curious, Dženeta, if you could tell us a bit how this open dialogue, or how any sort of dialogue and critiquing of the regimes of power where criminalization and racialization are seriously endangering people's lives and people's security, human security. What is the role of diaspora now, countering these restrictive policies and enable people to keep finding their ways, to keep finding and building bridges and, you know, building social ties?
Thank you, Emina. Well, diaspora is going to save the world. No, I'm kidding. But I think the important thing to say is diasporas are multifaceted, right? So we can't really lump them together to say, you know, diasporas will do something. I mean, I think it's important to sort of think of them as heterogeneous as the societies in which they live, as the societies in which they come from, right? They might have, particularly in the countries in which they're living, you know, experiencing a lack of resources themselves. Goran touched on this with the sort of increased levels of return migration. But increasingly, we're also seeing that they themselves might actually be, you know, targeted by securitized narratives, violence, populist politicians. So in my answer, I'll sort of focus on the possibilities of demonstrating their agency that Emina so eloquently sort of introduced the question with. But I just wanted to sort of, you know, preface this by saying they're not a heterogeneous actor. I think primarily, you know, they can act in solidarity for newcomers in helping to navigate bureaucratic procedures, helping to streamline processes, pool, you know, resources and information as newcomers ease and transition into a new life. And I think Alen's examples of Lastavica is a wonderful example. I think it's, of course, a very human response, right? Not to perhaps even say a humane response, and here is where the translators will hate me, right? And it's not only something that diaspora can do, right? It's very much a community building practice that in the long term accelerates inclusion, social cohesion, this level of belonging for newcomers, but I think also a belief of this belonging by those who are already living in the societies, right? I think that's a very important distinction to make. And sort of touching on this, I think diasporas can leverage the political influence that they do have, especially if they have voting rights, citizenship, right, in these countries, to sort of combat the very populist nationalist waves and really utilize their transnational connections to influence these politics towards more openness. I think this is the kind of political agency we're not seeing enough of, and it very much speaks to the sort of focus on assimilation that several of the other speakers have touched on, that genuinely disincentivizes diaspora to utilize the very agency they often do have, because especially if they have citizenship, they have complete buy-in in the societies in which they live. Now, of course, I'm sort of reflecting that I'm speaking to you from Austria, right, which doesn't allow for dual citizenship. It's actually the most restrictive citizenship regime in all of Europe. It's, I think, ranks number 3 in the world after, you know, Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, right? So I think it's something where, but it's at the same time a country where, you know, many diaspora members, especially those from the Balkans, have in the meantime gained citizenship, and where, you know, for them even more so, I think political engagement is even more important, because they actually have the potential to influence, you know, political narratives, influencing migration and beyond. And this kind of, I think, engagement also provides very much a pushback to, you know, the erosion of democratic norms and human rights that we're experiencing. And it's something that I encourage in my writing as well, including, you know, running for political office, right? Really get engaged in the process. Now, you know, beyond sort of the national, you know, boundaries, if you will, of the countries in which they live, you know, the potential of transnational leveraging of influence by amplifying, you know, concerns across, you know, diaspora organizations, or in cooperation even with individuals in the countries in the homelands, right, has, you know, potential very much to create boomerang effects that foster more engagement at the political level. So really turning up the heat, if you will. And I think this is the kind of social movements approach that has a lot of potential. I think Lucia touched on it. I think most of us have touched on it today. And I think maybe on, you know, to end from a very sort of personal perspective, as someone, you know, who myself grew up as a refugee, who I would probably consider that as my primary identity, if you will, to this day. I think there's an obligation to advocate on behalf of newcomers, right? For the, you know, to those who don't have necessarily the same level of access or voice that many diaspora members today have. Especially, you know, not to mention the privilege of, you know, being white passing, as many of us, or as really all of us from the Balkans, the majority of us, let's say, from the Balkans have, to really sort of offer some of the agency that we have, rather than sort of, you know, retreating and saying, well, you know, we had it hard, there were even less guardrails, we had to fight for, you know, to accomplish whatever we accomplished, and so newcomers should do the same. I think there's sort of a potential for that solidarity. And I think anything less than that is very much, you know, to go back to my point of, you know, not having a long-term perspective on the EU level, on the individual level. I think anything less than that is very much sort of short-sighted and only fuels the ongoing erosion of, you know, lived democracy and human rights that we're currently in, you know, across Europe and beyond. Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks so much. I think diasporic involvement is also, or when we talk about diasporic communities across Europe and globally, we are seeing that a lot of acts of solidarity, especially these days. For instance, I remember 2015, when during the mass arrival of refugees from Syria and elsewhere, Syrian communities that were already in Europe, or Arab communities that were already in Europe, turned to them and offered solidarity in sense of reading the procedures, helping their transition, and so on. I am also always impressed with Somali community, for instance, in North America or the United States, how it helps integration of new Somali or Somalis arriving, and so on. So this is something to explore and learn from, for sure. And also, I think an important aspect of how we are confronting racialized politics that likes to lump all diasporas in one flattening meaning. we are actually okay that people live in their within their communities and, you know, sort of follow their cultural sovereignty in a sense. And this is not necessarily a segregation. And the European politics, or even I would say sort of white Orientalism likes to call it that way, you know, segregation. So in that sense, there is a lot to dismantle here, unpack, unmask, and unlearn. And thank you so much all for participating in this conversation. It would be great if we could talk a little bit with people who have been patiently listening for over an hour and a half. We have about 20 minutes to open up this discussion. And I am seeing that Christian started the discussion with asking a question about Syrian refugees. Christian, would you like to articulate it by yourself, or would you like me to read it?
Sure, I can say it. Yeah,
Perfectly.
so the question is from the Institute of Democracy. We've been working closely with refugees, and one of the really serious concern was when the regime changed in Syria, many countries in Europe and Croatia joined that very quickly, have articulated that they will pause any application for asylum-seeking procedures with the possibility of returning these people in the future, which means that they're suspended the law immediately, and all the refugees coming from Syria are now in a limbo. They are allowed to work if they have a work permits, but that's it. They cannot proceed any further with their legal proceedings. And I've noticed that we did not, as a civil society, we didn't maybe have a adequate outrage reaction to it. And that kind of gave them a free pass to the Ministry of Interior Affairs, despite the fact that this is very much illegal because it suspended the law without approval of the parliament. So is there anything that we could be doing regarding that as well? Because this is quite a number of people.
Would anyone like to take that one? Lucia, Goran, as practitioners, I know your organizations are doing legal aid too, so you probably hear about these things.
I mean, I can briefly reflect, although I'm not a legal advisor, so it's note that. I would say that indeed, I think Croatia at least kind of followed European Union's lead in this sense when it comes to stopping the procedure of newly arrived asylum seekers or newly registered asylum seekers from Syria, in the sense that they have not been, of course, yet deported or rejected, which can very well be a possibility, but that now the process is kind of halted. People, yes, are in this legal limbo, so to say, awaiting, I would say, and I think Croatia is kind of awaiting too what the EU's kind of consensus will be when it comes to asylum seekers that are still in the process in not only in Croatia but elsewhere. I am not sure, honestly, I'm not sure what is going to come. I do think that it would be very outrageous if people's processes would be stopped. I mean, if they continue to be stopped, so to say, because the situation in Syria is still very much evolving and it's very unclear what will be the, the new government and so on. That's one point I wanted to say. But of course, it's very possible that people will kind of still be in this legal limbo. And this is, again, a moment where, yes, you're right, we should mobilize on this a lot more. It is also a question of Syrians who do have some kind of status, perhaps not citizenship, but other types of status, and what is going to be happening with them also all over Europe, not only in Croatia. But I see Goran has his hand up. Maybe he has more to say.
Go ahead, Goran.
I just have one short comment, which is in connection with the question, but it's from the, let's say, social media perspective. There is one quite big Facebook group in Germany, Gastarbeiter. I think the administrator is Dino Klepo. It has a big outreach within the migrant community, especially from ex-Yugoslavia. And when there was news, for example, from this attack from one Syrian guy in Austria, there was a really heavy reaction from migrants. You have to, push these people back to Syria. You have to push them back. So it's quite, it's also an internal, let's say, racism. We are not like them. These are the savages who came here to destroy the civilization. I don't know what. And this is also within the community of migrants. I'm not saying that, I'm not generalizing here, but I was just negatively astonished by this reaction from this community, which is really vast community, which has a vast outreach. And also the main news from this administrator was that the perpetrator was from Syria, as all the people from the Syria start to kill the people in Europe. So this was like then the reaction came. So this is quite a heavy problem of, perception, also within migrants, also within the, let's say, discourse of the issues. So I would say that, for example, my experience was also when I was talking with migrant workers and regarding their, let's say, reaction or their experience to the other nationalities, for example. It's quite interesting. For example, when you ask a Bosnian migrant worker, oh yeah, we have lots of Kosovars here, as they are, the second-level migrants. And then when you ask a Kosovan migrant worker, oh, there are some Syrians, the third-level migrant worker. So this is, a level of racism, which is unfortunately within the migrant community. And as I was giving you the picture of this, yes, racism within this group, which is one of the biggest Facebook group of informing between migrant workers in Germany, unfortunately.
I will only add to this that according to the State Watch, deportations to Syria have already started, and there were deportations from the EU across Cyprus noticed already, and we know that Turkish government has started already on the 9th of December last year deporting Syrians back. So it is the question of time when this is going to become a domino effect, especially given the enactment of returns under the new Pact on Migration and Asylum that is going to be aligned across the EU states with all the national plans and the joint EU plan by mid of this year. And so in that sense, given that the Pact mission is to enhance returns, we can expect those effects on Syrian populations. I think there is a difference too, if we are talking about the population from Syria that had arrived back in 2015 or 2016, and then today with the 8-year span, we can see that some Syrian or a number of Syrians have gotten their citizenship or some sort of residency permit. However, with those Syrians relocated in 2019, they are 2 years away from getting the residency permit. So this is where the risks are. They were resettled from Turkey, from Turkish camps where they spent 5, 7, 9, some of them 11 years. And so it is their situation, I think, is at this point is even more precarious. But let's move on. We have more questions here. We have question from Marica Miric from the Association or the Network of Persons with Disabilities Croatia, right?
Zajednica Saveza osoba s invaliditetom. Hvala lijepa na mogućnosti da sudjelujemo na ovom panelu, jer mislim da sve ove paradigme koje ste prekrasno prikazali i čestitam na tome i jako pozdravljam ovaj projekt, posebno su drastične kad su u pitanju osobe s invaliditetom. Govorim sa dva aspekta. Jedno, kad su osobe s invaliditetom kao migranti ili azilanti, tu čak smo imali iskustvo za dijete koje je s najtežim invaliditetom, da smo mi morali intervenirati da dobije i on ostvari i ona prava koja mu pripadaju kao azilantu i to je vrlo drastična situacija. Druga je situacija što naš zakon o strancima ne dozvoljava da se migranti, da oni ne mogu im se izdati dozvola za boravak i rad u udrugama, recimo osoba s invaliditetom. Mi smo sada u Hrvatskoj u jednoj velikoj ekspanziji i širenja prema zakonu usluge osobne asistencije i tu bi zasigurno takve osobe bile izrazito kvalitetne, izrazito poželjne, jer oni i sami imaju neko iskustvo i nasilja i svega onoga što se događa. Tako da, evo, potičem i hvala vam na prilici da to kažem, da nekako se izborimo. Problem je u to da se oni zaposle, da se mogu zaposliti, jer je problem u tome što kao osobni asistent nije zanimanje u hrvatskom kvalifikacijskom okviru i slično. Uglavnom ima puno različitih prepreka, ali ove su potrebe velike i sad ono što moram reći, nešto što su naši ljudi sami plaćali na crno, a ja sam imala priliku u jednom kampu mladih vidjeti upravo ponašanje tih osoba, ono je iznimno empatično. To su osobe koje onako posvećuju toliku pozornost kako mi nažalost nećemo vrlo često dobiti od ljudi koji taj posao obavljaju, a osobe su sa hrvatskim državljanstvom. Evo, to je jedan moj apel i smatram da je jako, jako lijepo da ste nas pozvali da ipak i ovaj dio rasvijetlimo. I imam još jednu treću zabrinutost, a to je da je u jednom, recimo, centru za migrante zaposlen socijalni radnik koji je napravio brojne pronevjere, ne znam šta, i sad je on kvalificiran možda da tamo od ovih ljudi uzima novce i tako da bih dodala još jednu dimenziju tome, to znači da se i ti ljudi neki, svaka čast vama svima koji ovdje radite i tako, ali ono kad to država instalira, kad to nije vladina udruga, uopće nedovoljno provjeravaju ili se upravo takve osobe stavljaju. Evo, hvala vam lijepa na prilici.
Hvala i vama, Marice. Thank you very much for your comments. If anyone feels drawn to respond to Marica at any point now or later throughout our responses, please feel free to do so. We do have a memory of mistreating persons with disabilities who were migrants in Croatian camps and through Croatian asylum procedures, and we've registered those in Serbia, Bosnia, Slovenia, across the region or this periphery of Europe. But Goran, maybe you want to respond to that, and Slađana.
Just a clear, short reaction, because I'm talking too much, obviously. So in regard to that question, it's really important question, because I will give you an example what is going on in Slovenia, short base example. So a person which is of migrant origin, to say, so migrant worker, which first becomes injured at the workplace, then he's on sick leave, then becomes a person with disabilities because of the workplace injury. There is a case, there is a possibility that this person, despite the fact that he was working for several years in Slovenia, all regarding the proper paperwork, of course, this person doesn't get €0 from invalidity pension because he doesn't have sufficient years of working years in Slovenia. So, for example, person is 30 years old, he has to have, for example, 6 years of working years in Slovenia to get the disability pension. If he doesn't have that, then he's out of the system. And if he doesn't have the permanent permanent status, he doesn't even have the access to the social welfare. So he doesn't have anything. So we have some cases like this. They became injured, they became persons with disabilities, but because they had not so much of working years in Slovenia, they're out of the system. And another thing is that what happens in the case of women, elderly women, for example, well, elderly, for example, I will give you an example of a woman which came to Slovenia, which she was 50 years old. She was a housewife for 30 years. She raised whole family. All the men came to Slovenia to work. She was back then in Bosnia working as a housewife. Then she came to Slovenia, became a cleaner. She cut herself, became a disability person. And because she doesn't have enough working years in Slovenia, she has a €0 of invalidity pension, despite the fact that basically she was working throughout all the years. First, she was a housewife. Then she came to Slovenia, but because she doesn't have sufficient years in social insurance, she's out of the system. And we try to, say this out loud several times, and the institutions are saying, well, we have to basically maintain the solidarity within the system of social insurance. We have to maintain that if you collect so much, if you gain so much track record within the system, you get so much money out of the system. But, the tragic story is that these very same migrant workers are being treated within the perspective of these very same institutions as the saviors of the pension system, as the saviors of the demography. So if we import lots of migrant workers, then the pension system will be saved, but not for these people with disabilities. And we have more and more migrant workers which become persons with disabilities because of the working load, because of the work injuries. So this will happen more and more. And this is why this is a very important question. What is going on with persons with disability who are migrants?
I just wanted to, can I cut in, Emina, for quickly? I'm so glad that there is so much interesting question. I will read it from the chat. Ms. Ružica Šimić-Panović asks Mr. Lukič and Mr. Kovačević, how do you ensure that migrants receive all the necessary information to support their integration efforts? I'm mainly asking about the migrant workers living and working in disadvantaged conditions, being in touch mostly with the migrants from their country origin. And I will read another question, so maybe you can both or other deputies can answer this question. We have from Tanya Odobasic from the British Refugee Council. Question is how we hold media accountable in Croatia for creating certain hostile environment. Also politicians, if they use racist and hateful narrative that gives examples and permission to the public to be openly racist and spread hate, how this can be tackled. So 2 questions.
So if we can ask Goran and Alen maybe to respond to the first one, and Lucia and Dženeta, if you could also reflect on the media question and the integration one, and then we're going to wrap up. Theo, I know we haven't read your comment here, but if you could send your contact, we are going to reach out to you later because we might have some information, or you could give us also some information as well. But if there is a minute left, please feel free to elaborate this.
Join for that question. It was about like how we get and inform the migrants. So I use our practices here.
Sorry, Alan, if I may clarify it, maybe the thing is, can I talk just a second?
Yeah,
the thing is that usually the migrants, say taxi drivers, delivery guys, they usually live in groups and are not necessarily linked to any of the initiatives targeting their integration efforts. In addition to that, we have a number of initiatives that are growing, but when it comes to the real beneficiaries, or the ones who should have most benefit out of it, they mostly don't get that kind of information. And also when I research those groups and when I talk to them, they're kind of scared as well, because of course it's not that they only had good experiences in their destination country or countries. So that is why I'm asking, have you selected maybe some leaders of their groups? For instance, when it comes to the digital nomads, they're much better organized, positioned in the society, and also better at providing the information and sharing the information among themselves.
As I mentioned at the beginning, to give information to foreigners or migrants is one of the biggest goals. So we trying to do so in 2 ways. I would say physical way and online way. So we have let's say field workers or colleagues who are joining the, let's say, visit accommodations where migrants living. Also we visiting workplaces where migrants are employed. and we provide them like with specific information, not only like leave the leaves, but we want to talk to them. We want to, let's say, get them know better. We want to make them feel that we are really care, and we really want to inform them what their rights, what they want, what they are able to do, what they should do, and so on. On the other hand, you can never maybe inform 100% of the migrants because it's not possible to reach them all. But I would say it's a really effective one way to go and talk to the communities and the workplaces, accommodation, and so on, and provide them with the information so that we are NGO, we are not part of state, whatever, like things and on. And we know that about like 20% of people we let's say visit are coming to our center, and then we have other online, I would say, online coveraging. We are really well preparing information in our social media and our website, and because of great feedback we have from clients, we know that they're sharing the information. So people are really on the phones right now, so they know how to contact us. They know how to contact our workers, our social workers, our legal, legal workers, our intercultural workers who are going with them to, let's say, hospitals, schools, and so on. So I would say this is this two-way thing. You have to do in both online and then physical visiting the community, to talk to them. And of course, one biggest let's say positive thing in the integration center of Prague, even more of 50%, 60% of our employees have been migrant background, or they are migrants, as I am. I also have already a Czech citizenship for some 12 years, but we have many people who work here from Ukraine, from Russia, from Vietnam. I would say the biggest minorities who lives here in Czech. So we have workers, and it really helps us to going more closely to community, to work to them, to, let's say, convince them that integration is really important here, to not stay just inside community, but walk out and try to do the things by alone. Because also here in Czech Republic, I would mention that the people who are mostly, I would say, make the money from the migrants, from the foreigners, it's people from their own community. So it's really unfortunately a business. So with agencies, maybe as Goran talked about like an hour ago, agency, Ukrainian agency, Vietnamese agency, doing really not really in favor of integration here. So they really wanted to shift in the people as soon as they see a new let's say companies who wants to hire. So yeah, I would ask question. You have to go to community to talk to them and try to give them the information they need. And of course, you are not able to integrate everyone who doesn't want. Yeah, we are not going to him and take out with hand. Come on, let's join us. So yeah, that's my answer.
Thank you, Alen, so much. It's noon, so we cut close to our time to end this. So I'm going to ask Lucia and Dženeta if you could maybe just give brief commentary at the end, and then we're going to close it. Commentary to the questions, right?
I can maybe be brief, and maybe I leave the question of media to Dženeta, if it's okay. I would just like to reflect very briefly on this concept of self-segregation. I think it's very important to understand how we got there, and we are seeing in Croatia nowadays, at least, a huge rise in racialized violence, physical violence towards people, and this can be we can see how this happened also in other places like the UK, France, and so on. So this point that people are self-segregating in a way is not only to what Emina was saying, preserve this kind of cultural element that tries to be erased, but also for their literally physical safety, because the society that they are in right now is extremely hostile. So that's something I did want to point out. To reflect on this racism coming from migrant communities, I mean, of course, the point becomes this racial hierarchies, right? And we are trying to be close to whiteness by using anti-Black racism, Islamophobic racism towards those who we deem as culturally not as close as us to this concept of perfect Europeans and whites. So yeah, maybe I end with this, and I leave the floor to others.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, the question of media is one. I think in your question, what I found really interesting is that you touched on these sort of permission structures that media has created that basically enforce and allow, right? They make it easier to be, racist, etc. in the sort of everyday public dialogue. And I think in many ways, the best way I think there's two ways to sort of combat it, right? Beyond the sort of education and sort of fostering independent research and media. I think on one side, there's really sort of an incentive to focus on the hypocritical stance that this creates and really pursue sort of existing legal avenues that demand the enforcement of legislation that is on the books, that is, against hate crimes, that doesn't, promote racism. I mean, we have this legislation on the books across the European Union, and I think there's something to be said about actually enforcing it, right? The second one is to actively develop an anti-racist stance. I think at this point, we're seeing that simply not being racist, right, the sort of is insufficient, right, to combat the systemic racism, populist, nationalist narratives that we see. So this kind of proactive approach. And again, I think primarily even more so important for those of us who sort of live with the privileges that we live in, whether they're, based on our skin color or socioeconomics, education, etc., in these societies, to really speak out to this, because, we have, for lack of another way of putting it, less to lose than those, who have precarious legal statuses, etc., etc. So that would be the sort of very quick answer to a very big question. Thank you.
Thank you, Dženeta. Well, I think there's so many questions, and so many of you very passionate about this work is telling me that actually there's a huge need. I think there's a huge test to humanity, I would say. I would conclude this discussion for all of us in this area. Thank you all for working in this field, all your efforts to actually satisfy basic human rights. I would like to thank all of our debatees, our panelists, for your expert insight and all that you offered us in terms of great questions that Emina offered us as well. So thank you, Emina, as well, for great moderating and great expertise that you are also working in the field. We have put actually all of our debatees, panelists, where they're working. So if you have a need or maybe some other deeper understanding of the topic, you can contact them, and also you can contact us if you need anything else. I wish you all the great afternoon, productive or relaxing, as you wish. Depends on your plans. And yes, this is it. Thank you so much for joining us and participating. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Hvala vama. Ostajete pozitivni. Radite dobro svoj posao najbolje što možete. Pozdrav veliki.
Hvala. Pozdrav.
Pozdrav, Dženja. Hvala vam.
Bye.
Bye. Doviđenja.
Bye-bye.
Hvala vam. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bog, bog.
Bog.